personnel mines and armor mines, all the way down practically to the Harbor. And so that was the delay portion of my job. And that took the longest, because that's where we had to go out into this, away from the road, the trails and the roads, and figure out how they were going to come down, and how many men would be left behind to arm these things, and how many men would be, what kind of positions we could take, where could we ambush them.
Mm-hmm.
We knew it was suicide, but we had to slow them down if they did it. Well, at any rate, that was my job. So I would venture to say that 1956, most of the year I was doing just that. And then sometime in the latter part of 56, it was getting cold in Europe. It was either the end of October, November, I'm not exactly sure when it was. I think it was in the end of October. They call me back, and they start educating me on the terrain east of Budapest. And I spent about 2 weeks studying all of the terrain, the passes, where we can, or where they can get out. They were wanting me to completely, and I didn't know it at the time, they didn't want me to go into Hungary, or deep into Hungary. They wanted me to, they knew there was all kinds of shit going down. The Soviets were there. The Hungarians, I remember, were raising Cain. They were fighting with their own government. And the Soviets, at that time, if I remember correctly, they weren't sure whether they were going to stay in Hungary or not stay in Hungary, or whether or not they were going to come down and quelch it. You know, a lot happened in a short period of time, and our intelligence had told us that it was going to happen. And so the training that I underwent, because I was now I was a prima donna as far as reconnaissance is concerned. I was top of my field. I wasn't top in rank because I kept getting busted, because I'd be out getting this night or I just was not really a soldier anymore. Nothing could, remember, after Korea, nothing could hurt me. That's what I believed. And then, so all of this was going on in Hungary. They wanted to know what was going on, just like in Tibet. They wanted to know what was going on, just like in Korea. They wanted to know what was going on the other side of the Yalu, and that's why I was there. That was my job, to find out what they don't know, bring back the intelligence, the units, the numbers, what units they are, how much strength they have, what armor they have, if any, what. Well, in Hungary, it was strictly what's going on. Soviets were keeping a clamp on everything. It was a big thing in the United Nations, I remember, about it. And then, so they sent me there just to find out if I could blend in and find out were there any Soviet troops east of, were they on the border, or where were they? What was going on?
So were you there,
I was there at their.
looking like a civilian?
Oh yeah, I would have been shot as a spy anywhere I was sent.
So where were you living? What were you doing? How did you
All right,
blend in?
when I first got there, I had a little money that they supplied to me, and I went to a little town called Deutschkreuz. Deutschkreuz is in eastern Austria, on the border with Hungary. Now I first went, I didn't go right to Deutschkreuz, I went to the bigger cities and then casually worked my way up to Deutschkreuz. I spoke, at that time I was speaking German fairly fluently. I mean, I had spent a long time in Germany, so they didn't train me to be a spy. They trained me to have enough marks and sense not to get caught. So when I got to Deutschkreuz, there were tons of Hungarian underground people there, back and forth, bringing people out. And they were anywhere from 16, 17, 18, and 20. They were younger and my age. It was a big student, as I found out, a big student. It started off as a student rebellion. And it started off peacefully, and then of course it turned violent. Well, I became very friendly with them, and they would take me on some of these night jaunts. And they couldn't believe that I knew the territory better than they did. Because I had all these aerial photographs, and I had all this information that I was trained and drilled into my head. I knew where every damn hill was. And they couldn't believe that. And so they all spoke English, by the way. They were all students, bright kids. And pretty soon, I became one of their main guides. And night after night, we'd go in there and we'd pull out. And I wasn't supposed to do this. The Army, no, I was supposed to find out information and send it back, right? Well, in the course of what I was doing, I found out a tremendous amount of information and did send it back. All by CW.
What's CW?
Continuous wave, it's a Morse code.
Okay.
All right?
Alright.
But my interest in my world became these kids that I was now part of, and bringing out all the intelligentsia of Hungary, the musicians, the professors, all the doctors, the lawyers. You see, all the people that ended up in this country as Marxists, but it's okay. We brought them all out as younger people.
To the United States, that's where they were going, or where were they going?
No, from Hungary, out of Hungary.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Okay.
Into Austria.
Okay.
Then they were on their own, as far as I was concerned.
I see.
But they had to get out of Hungary. Hungary was now, they'd be killed. They'd be assassinated. They'd be enslaved.
Why?
Well, because of the government. The government, it was the intelligentsia, the students, the young, that created the revolt against the Marxist government of Hungary.
Okay.
That was sponsored by the Soviet Union.
I see.
Now the Soviet Union, they had a force there, but it was a token force. Okay? And I never did encounter any Soviet units between Deutschkreuz and Budapest. All right? I encountered Hungarian units, governmental units, but I don't remember ever seeing any Soviet units. They might have been elsewhere. But I did send back the strength and the positions of the units that I did find. And it was all by longitude, latitude. There were ways to do it.
Right.
That I could pinpoint them. It got to the point where we smuggled out the underground, of which I was now part of, thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees. Maybe 6 figures worth. Because every night we'd have 30 200-300 more, sometimes 1,000. And we weren't the only ones doing it. There were other areas that they were getting them out through other countries.
And how were they physically doing that?
The word got out in Budapest. All of those that wanted to get out from Hungary would come to Budapest. And they would be contacted and educated by the underground. And they all knew, each one was assigned a group and an embarkation point in time. And at that time, they could get away with it because the Soviets weren't involved. They were there, but they weren't involved. And some of the Soviets were, they emotionally felt for the young people, because the Soviet troops were very young too. So they sided, a lot of them, even though the units didn't, a lot of the soldiers did. I met a few of them. So we smuggled out night after night after night after night. Not only through Deutschkreuz, although that was my base of operation, but areas around there. Everybody I smuggled out came out through Austria. And an example of that, you remember, is Holly's wedding. And
Holly being your daughter.
Holly being my daughter. And Holly and David, before the wedding, quite a while before, her boyfriend was David. I think his last name was Verzele, really, although he went with a different name. Now, his father, and I had never seen David before Holly introduced me, and he kept telling me about this wonderfully talented father he had, who was the head celloist of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. He and Yo-Yo Ma were like that. And I heard about this and heard about it, and suddenly one day he comes up and they lived in L.A. and he's telling me he's bringing his dad's coming west to visit him, and he wants to bring him up here to meet me. Now this is after after he had come to me and asked me for my permission to marry Holly, but they weren't married yet. I don't think they were anyway.
No, they weren't, because they announced it at the wedding.
That's right. And so that's right. See, so it runs at remember, all of this is my memory, and I'm 78 years old, and a lot. If I'd have written this all down as it went through, it would have been great, but I didn't. Okay. So this is a good example. In walks his father, and he stares at me, and he sits down. We have a big dinner here, and then we're looking at pictures of my family and his family, and the whole time he's here, he's staring at me, and it made me very self-conscious. I said, what is this, father, gay? I just was very self-conscious. And then his father looks at me, and he said, let me ask you a question. His father spoke English beautifully. They were from Hungary. And he said, were you ever in Hungary? Did you ever visit my country of birth? And I looked at him and I said, yeah. He said, I thought so. He looked at me and he said, 1956, were you there? I looked at him, I didn't know what, and I said, yeah. And he said, then you're the guy that smuggled me and all of my family out of home, aren't you? Your name is Alan? That's all we knew you as was Alan, an American. He had no business being there, but he was our friend. Yes, and that's how it turns out was the leading guide that smuggled David's father and whoever else was in his family to come with him. And he was a musician, a very accomplished musician at the time, young fellow, my age. And I had smuggled him out of Hungary.
Wow.
Now, is this a small world or
That's
what? So,
crazy.
so when Holly and David got married at that wedding, David, after his vows, you remember this, said, now I have to tell you all something. And I think his father had died already, had just died.
Mhm.
His father had just died.
He wasn't there.
No, he had just died. He was quite ill and he died. And he told the story to everybody at the wedding. Now my family, my nephews, my cousins, they never knew anything about it. They knew I was in the army, but they never knew anything about any of my experiences. I never told my family, I never told my kids, I never told anybody. Why? Why should I? It's something in the past. So they were all stunned. I turned around, their mouths were all hanging open.
That is wild.
Well, anyway, so get back to Hungary. And it wasn't. It was very short, very quick. I think it was less than a month, really. Sometime late October, and I believe. Well, I'll tell you. I believe it was over in early November. But I'll tell you how it was over. In the middle of it, evidently the Soviets decided that they were going to not take action against and let it all happen, or that they were going to, Khrushchev, I think it was Khrushchev and Zhukov, decided that they were going to get their troops out, maybe withdraw from Hungary altogether. And of course, I didn't know it at the time, but all of a sudden, all the Soviets were gone. And I didn't know it, and all these young kids that I was working with, they were ecstatic. They had thrown the Soviets out of Hungary. And they started drinking and partying, and they threw me into the back of an open pickup. Now remember, it's cold. It's late October maybe, right? Beginning of November. And they were trying to fill me with cognac. I can't drink much, so I just remember that cold trip from the border to Budapest, singing and laughing, and they wanted me to come and meet their mothers, their fathers, their cousins, their uncles, their wives, their friends. I had to meet everybody. And they kept me piped with cognac. Sick and I get bad, and I went from one party to I just remember it from like it was a dream. And then one morning I wake up and I'm sick as a dog, and I'm in a basement, and the basement has long windows up on top at street level. And I woke up and all I hear are these tank treads. Look up and it was Soviet tanks. The Soviets decided to come back and squash the whole thing. So there was about a week there between freedom and occupation. And then the rest of the story is how they smuggled me out of Hungary in hay wagons at night. I had troops with bayonets poking in the hay to make sure there was nobody there, but they were missing me. Thank God they missed me.
And you were the only one in that?
Yeah, it was family after family after family, all the way from Budapest back to Austria. They kept me in basements in their homes during the day, in their farms, and how we traveled at night incognito, and the only problem is when I got to the border now was really beefed up, and it was not only beefed up with Hungarian border guards, but it was beefed up with Soviet soldiers. And they got me to just above the border, and I had to, in the middle of the night, see if I could get down and cross, because they couldn't get any closer. It was too dangerous for them. So they all kissed me goodbye, and I spent that night crawling and running and crawling and not being seen till I was just about at the border. And all of a sudden I hear these dogs. And the dogs found me, not the troops, all the border guards. And so I just got up and started running, and I'm running like hell, and there's, right there I could cross. And just at that moment, this remember I said Doberman Pinscher? I told you that that was the only dog that I really didn't like. But yesterday I told you.
Yeah.
And this Doberman leaps and grabs me by the ankle. Okay? And that's when the troops, and so I shot the dog. I had a handgun. And then I had to get across that border as quick as I can, and they started shooting at me. And one bullet nicked me in the inner thigh. I have a scar, I'm not going to show you. Missed my package by that much. Okay? Just a little flesh wound, just nicked me. And when I got across the border, because I knew a lot of people over there, and a lot of the underground units had fled and were there too, and they took care of me. And then I was supposed to go back to Europe, but I didn't. I mean, go back to Germany, but I didn't. I had heard that England, France, and Israel had invaded Egypt over the Suez Canal. It was all over the news, and it was not television, but it was radio. And here I am in Austria. I'm saying I could go back. I said, "What the hell? Why don't I go help my Israeli people? Why don't I go back, see if I can get myself to Israel?" So I ended up going to Israel. And I joined the Israeli army. This was in November, maybe November 56.
Can I ask you one question? Because, so is it that you just cross the finish line, basically, or if you just cross over into Austria, they can't come and get you?
No, they had to stop at the border.
So what was on the other side? Who was on the other side?
All of my, so many of my, they were all notified that I was being dropped off, and they were
Okay.
waiting for me. All my underground friends.
Okay, yeah.
And they were
So-
waiting for me at the other side, not in plain sight of the border.
But what happens when you actually cross the border and you safely get, this
Well,
dog
they
and
were,
they're
the
shooting
dog
you?
was dead. They were shooting at me from a higher position.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't following me across the border,
Oh,
you see? And when I crossed the border, on the other side, there was enough shrubs and hills, a little hill, so that, and they were shooting at me across the border. But they weren't hitting me.
wow.
And so, yeah, that was a weird experience. I mean, that one night, I don't know if you talk about a farmer's daughter. I really shouldn't talk about these kind of things on the, but one night, I must have been, probably the night before the final night to get across the border. I'm with this farmer and his wife, and they have 3 children. The oldest one was a 17-year-old girl. she had been in the underground, and still was. But when the Soviets came back, they all faded, a lot of them faded back into their homes, you know, so that they wouldn't. And she had known me, I hadn't known her. And
You were coming through Hungary as Alan,
mm-hmm.
so everybody knew
Alan.
who you were and why they wanted to
But
help
she
you.
had seen me many times because I was a leader of the group. But I had, the girls then, they weren't like looking sexy girls. When they were out there, they had caps on. They looked like men. And they had these jackets on. You couldn't tell. I mean, you knew they were women, but that wasn't in part of this. So I didn't ever see her at all. I might have seen her, not known her. And so they put me up that night, and I was in the barn. And they had a feed place underneath. It was a trap door, and you go down, and they had feed in there or something. And then so when they put me in there, they closed the trap door and they put the hay up on top, so that if anybody came to search, they wouldn't find me unless they had dogs. And I'd say about 11 o'clock one night, she comes down, and boy, she didn't look like a underground unit when she came down. She knew what she wanted. So it wasn't all hell, but it was a lot of hell. I remember I was a young guy. I was 20, what was I, 22? 1956, I was 22 years old. And good looking. But I was still a very young 22 when it came to socialize. I was an old man when it came to experiences in army and fighting and logic. But when it came to fraternizing, I was a kid. That's because of my college days, when all the guys in the fraternity were making out with their girlfriends, and here I'm the gopher, you know?
The kid.
Yeah, the kid. Well, so here I am in Hungary, in Austria, and I get myself to, I don't remember exactly what. Well, anyway, I worked my way to. It's a haze in my mind now. But I ended up in the Israeli army, and the Israeli army I was in the Sinai Desert. In those days, I mean, it's not like Israel today. It was all desert. I think, if I remember correctly, that the British and French pulled out. And the Israelis didn't pull out. They stayed for, I don't remember how long. But when I got there, the British and French were still there. I think it was, I met Moshe Dayan, who I think was the head of the Israeli military. He had a patch, a black patch over his arm. Intriguing guy. And he and I chatted for a long time. In English.
In English?
Oh, in English,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I wasn't the only one. There were quite a few American Jewish GIs, that left the American army in Germany and went down to join the Israeli army to fight the Egyptians. Quite a few of us. Eisenhower was president. There was a big deal in the United Nations about it. Eisenhower was not happy that the English and French and Israelis had done that. He wanted, if I remember correctly, he wanted a diplomatic solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll make sure it's recording.
Yeah, I hate to think of it not. I made a couple of notes so that I would remember who the hell was there. Yeah, that's right. I was in a unit and I remember the colonel. The colonel was Ariel Sharon, who later became, I think, prime minister. But he was the, I met him. Was it David Ben-Gurion that was the premier? Let me see. I have to do this because I had no way. Chief of Staff was Moshe Dayan, the Prime Minister was David Ben-Gurion. Okay. Israel Defense Forces was the IDF, which is what I was part of. And the leader of Egypt was Nasser. And so when I got there, it was touch and go. We had rounded up. I was there. I guess I was an Israeli acting. I was a acting major in the Israeli army, and my the unit I was assigned to was being run by a lieutenant colonel. The most beautiful lieutenant colonel you ever saw in your life.
A woman.
Sabra woman. Oh, she was gorgeous. And from the moment our eyes met, and at night, we would round up a lot of Egyptian prisoners. They surrendered. It was amazing how they were the worst fighters I've ever seen. 21 of us captured 600